So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot for the past couple of weeks is Gonzalo Guerrero. And to the people who are listening and don't know the story of Gonzalo Guerrero, he was a Spaniard who got shipwrecked for several years. And when Hernan Cortez in 1519 came around to find him, it turned out that Gonzalo Guerrero was now a Mayan warlord. He was a general, and he didn't need any saving. And so, what's just so fascinating to me about that story is he just embraced a new life. He forgot about his past life and he just embraced a new one. And it's a real story, but it sounds like the stuff of movies. And the other day I was driving and it made me think about that statement, life imitates art, art imitates life. It's like, yeah, that story is a perfect example of that. It's real, but it seems so extraordinary in its own way. And I think that's just history in general, eh? You have a bunch of these stories that have that effect.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think like I didn't know that story, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by um, uh, the empire effect and the colonial effect of like where the usually it's like they want the indigenous to be more civilized and converted, but sometimes it has the opposite effect. It just reminds me of South Asian history. Actually, there's an entire genre of South Asian history that anybody could study. And it starts off actually in like 1795, where one third of let's say British people who were there, and this is before the British Raj, right? So yeah, so the England had not taken over India holistically, at least politically speaking. So the Mughal Empire is still set there. So in 1795, the slow encroachment of the East India Company is definitely there, and the Mughal Empire is shrinking. So the British are there, and they're doing the little things over there. And if you look at 1795, or maybe the 5 years around it, one third of Wales written records that are left behind were actually Englishmen leaving behind their property and their monetary wealth to Indian wives. And that was astonishing because what they did was, as it was, not discovered, but it was well known that slowly these civilized society of Europe that came to India decided that they want to be part of that civilized society of India instead. And they, depending on which region or which religion they adopted, some became Muslim, some even became Hindus. They decided to wear their clothing, they would wear their dhotis, they would marry Indian wives. Of course, they had their mansions and wealth, which they brought from Britain. But the drive was the industrial era of England. Smog everywhere. London wasn't the most beautiful place to live anymore. They wanted that romantic, when I say romantic, I don't mean romance and love. I mean romantic actually meant, if you ever look at romantic art, is that he's this man looking in his in the field out there somewhere where like he's looking at more of a greenery area, right? And he's looking at like nature and he's studying nature. Nature's epic and it's grandiose and it shows this huge thing. So that's what they saw India as. And they came there and they just adopted. They wanted that. Um, and there was a funny incident as well in a book was written where because all the men were leaving England and marrying Indian wives. So there was a huge wave of British women who were not married in England and couldn't find their husbands. And I want to use the word leftovers, but like they couldn't find husbands and they were reaching their 20s, which was, a little too late for them. And these women were run off to these rich men in India and Englishmen and try to, force them to marry the white women instead. And that I guess this ordeal of marrying Indian women had kind of ceased a little bit at the end. And in this way, they came there, they conquered and preserved that area. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to share that tidbit a little with you because it was pretty interesting. Because when you mentioned that, it never goes how colonial and imperialistic minds, it never goes as planned. And this dates back to even Pocahontas, right? Like they tried their best to civilize the Native Americans. Sometimes it just backfired.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that because going back to Gonzalo Guerrero,
Yeah.
he's considered among one of the first to have fathered mestizo children, a mix of the Spaniards and the natives. And what you were just sharing right now randomly reminded me of the title of this one book that has always stuck with me, but I never explored. It's called White Moguls. And now that you shared this, I'm curious, how common is it for the Indians and Pakistanis of today to have any British blood in them?
Very common. I actually have White
Wow.
Nobles by William Dalrymple, you mean, in my library. It's not in this room, but I would have brought it out. I actually have every book of William Dalrymple with me.
I didn't know
Um,
he wrote that one as well. Wow.
he wrote that book as well. If that's the one you're referring to, White Mughals is actually White Mughals is actually not really. It's a historical narrative, and it's written that way, but it's actually a love story, believe it or not.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a love story of a British man marrying a princess, I believe, or a no, nobility, a woman of nobility, and
like
she,
Gonzalo Guerrero. He married a
yeah,
princess. Am I in
yeah,
princess?
and so I mean, they would call them princesses. We would just call them like the chief's daughter, the leader of the tribesman's daughter. But in this case, it was a kind of a heartbroken story a little bit. He falls in love with a Muslim Shia woman, obviously, and then they have two kids together. And how, long story short, like houses are torn apart, decisions have to be made, and these like half-bred, you could say, children had to be shipped back to England and reside the rest of their lives there, and never really being acclimated or really accepted because why? Because of their dark skin, right? Or at least
Mm.
slightly darker skin than normal Englishmen and women. So it's a story of, I guess, like, stereotypical racism, but it's just actually a love story, and it's pretty interesting read. And I would definitely recommend you and your listeners to listen to it and segueing into it. And definitely, I'm not endorsing William Dalrymple here anyway, but his podcast is amazing, and he's actually coming to Houston, I believe, on April 29th for his new book.
And what is the new book called?
Um, I'm forgetting the name of the book. It's referring to how India played a huge role in the Silk Road and the growing economy. That like how even back from the Roman days there was active trade with India, and that's why India is in the conscious, like, Rome barely knew China existed, but they definitely knew India existed because of trade.
Dionysus.
Exactly. And so they knew because of that trade, and um, even in actually in the book talks about this when the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually discovered. I mean, they go by that brand name, but there's a lot more other scrolls that were discovered in Gospel of Thomas, but and other invoices were there, like just like shipping invoices. And some of these invoices would detail out like an inventory of what's on the ship and who's trading it, where it's coming from. So a man would ship in goods from India that would make him so wealthy that you had to buy your way into becoming a Roman senator. So he would a one shipload of expensive, ivory and whatever sells in Rome would then actually be he would have enough left over after he sold all the goods to become a wealthy senator within the Roman Senate.
And this is
And
an Indian man?
this is no, this is a Roman man, Roman
Okay, but just
like
goods from India.
in a good from India, which means it
Interesting.
showcases that that India was in the consciousness of world society, right? Why not China? I don't know, but I
I know they
always
had a name for China, but yes, it was
Chin
just
or
barely.
Arabs had it Chin. They probably, but but I mean, according to like some historians, like just Rome just didn't go that far. They just didn't know that there was an existence, and obviously they never traveled the opposite way to Columbus, right? That's when like other things were discovered, like North America. I mean, the world did not know that North America existed, right? At least from the world, like a very select few people, but as soon as
Vikings.
right? That's I mean that's amazing, right? Like there's an entire set of continents, like a pair of continents, North and South, if you count them, that the world did not know existed. And
Yes, yes. And it's funny that you say that because, again, funnily enough, it goes back to Gonzalo
yeah,
Guerrero. I think that's another element of why I find him so fascinating. Nobody knew these cultures and these lands, but he decided to just, from what I understand, voluntarily immerse himself in that culture. I mean, he
oh
was
yeah,
shipwrecked, of course, for years, but when there was a chance to bring him back to Christendom, he said, I don't want it.
yeah.
That's what's so fascinating to me. Like, this is quite literally a new world for them. In today's globalized society, we can just go onto YouTube and watch a video about walking the streets of Tehran. It's not the same experience, of course, but you get to witness that. You know it's out there. It's a frontier that's visible to you. But back then in the 1500s, quite literally a new world. And you decide, this is my future. I'm letting go of my past. It's just so bizarre to me, so fascinating.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think letting go. I think he let go of his culture, his religion, and to sum it up, his identity to adopt a new one. And it's never an easy task, but it it always baffled anybody who did that, right? Any power hungry imperialistic society that was expanding their reach everywhere. Whenever they came across any individuals that why did you just abandon your own religion, your own people, and your own language and identity to adopt a new one, right? It was always like I guess baffling to people. And those people, I guess, need to be researched more and explored more. Like, what was that cause? Like, it's never easy to abandon that because you're coming from power and you're letting go of that power to assimilate into a new culture. And there must be something about the Mayan culture that he adopted, right? Like, our images of Mayan culture are a bunch of naked people running around who are uncivilized, right? But I say that there must be something fascinating about them.
When I was walking in the park today, I was thinking about this as well. And it gave me a greater appreciation for people that convert to Islam or revert, I guess I should say, because you always hear that these people they they're quite literally changing their lives. It could be it probably is a different cultural shift, obviously a religious shift. And just that story again, Gonzalo Guerrero just made me think, I mean anyone really, whether it's changing religions or cultures or whatever. It's a big thing. It's a big thing to
Yeah.
immerse yourself into something else. I mean, it quite literally requires that you burn some of your past.
I look at
Big
it the
sacrifice.
way yeah, it's definitely a sacrifice, but it's also a metamorphosis, right?
I like that word.
It's a painful growth. And maybe sometimes it's not painful, but it's definitely growth. It's never, Allah says He's never gonna like, let you like exist without testing your faith, right? So I guess like their faith as converts or reverts is different than people who are born into Islam. Their test is different than people who are born in Islam, who are just cultural Islam, their own practice. So everybody has their own, I guess. But yeah, I have a huge respect for anybody who decides to adopt this religion. You know, I was always fascinated with my background when it came to Islamic knowledge. And I always recount my teachers. Who were my teachers? You know, a good chunk of them were actually converts. Like they were all converts and they were converted in the 90s. And I could name all of them. And my Islam comes from people who converted, not from like some mullahs or anything from Pakistan or anything like that. Even though I was fairly young when I came to the Americas, but I never got traditional Islamic knowledge. And I got it from converts and their passion is different. You know, their enthusiasm is different. Their zest for knowledge and for this deen is different. And they definitely bring in a different flavor. So it's kind of surprising when he told me that. I was just like, just made me think. I'm like, man, I could name like a good like 8 people, on top of my head right now, just like they're all converts. And they
Wow.
got to a level that they became my teachers. Yeah.
That says something, eh?
Yeah. It says something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's even more fascinating about that is that they managed to maintain that enthusiasm. They managed to keep that
Yeah.
fire lit, burning inside of them.
It's not that's a very hard endeavor. It's hard to carry on that, that eventually, and there are people burn out. And it may not make it easy for all of us, but yeah, it's always, with the committed people, I'm always in awe of, how do you manage to keep that fire going, to keep, showing up no matter what. There's so many volunteer people who volunteer their time for anything. It could be just the masjid, it could be something else, but to consistently show up, no matter what. Yeah, to master your own soul, it's not easy.
What do you think commitment is to you?
I think commitment for me would be from a religious point of view. It's not really commitment to the laws, but I guess it's commitment to commitment itself, right? Like if there are, I think like for me, fundamentals are the most important thing. It always comes back to the idea of where do people where do people falter or waver or just go astray, and it is those fundamentals, right? It's like just making sure you're praying, making sure you're still connected to this deen, right? um one of my favorite memories, when I kind of I was in this, obviously, when you grow up in the 90s, you're given a different flavor of dawa. And I'm all, so I went from just culturally religious to super hardcore, and obviously I was part of a particular spectrum of there. So, you go through a religious phase, and I think that's never a bad thing. It's always a good thing to grow, religiously, be more super committed to everything. Um, and then over time, I started seeing things where, how come people are way more committed than I am with their belief without following the regulatory rules of Islam. By what that I mean is, okay, they won't pray 5 times a day. They're not masjid people. They do sin, but their love for God, at that moment in my memory, I felt was greater than mine. And here's how I felt about that, because remember I was playing some kind of sport. So late at night, we would routinely play baseball or something like that. And one of these guys would just like, we would have this, powwow, a bunch of guys sit together or whatever. And he would walk across to the gas station, get one of those canned beers. But these are all Muslims. And you would get these canned beers, come back, drink, and then just drink again, have a regular conversation, and just somehow bring every topic to God and His Prophet. Every topic. And I was just like, some people might find that very offensive, right? Um, and which makes sense. But I don't know, at that moment, I felt like I should have felt offensive. I was thinking like, how can he sin and still love God? Right? Because I always found them just kind of exclusive,
That's a powerful question. How
right?
can he
Like,
sin and still love God?
and so I thought to myself, like, he's like in love with God. He's like, he knows he's a sinner. And then it kind of made me just reminded of the incident of the Prophet ﷺ where, when a man would come drunk to the masjid and, people would become rowdy and become angry at him, maybe even get up to actually punish him physically. And the Prophet ﷺ said to leave him alone, because he loves God and he loves his messenger. Um,
Well, I didn't
so
I
I, I
didn't know
think,
that part of that story actually. That's interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's because everybody's on their own journey, right? Everybody's on their own journey. And I started to stop um, allowing myself to question people's journey. That was, I guess, my change or my metamorphosis, where I was like, I'm gonna let people continue to journey as long as they're not calling out to their own personal sins and they're trying to grow and be closer to God, then they're on their own journey. Everybody's going to be on different levels, and I think Allah rewards people who try.
Yes.
Because how
I
many
like
people
it.
have we seen, and maybe you have seen in our own lifetime, that we would put them on a a platform, and they have fallen, right? And they have fallen back. Just in a lot of recent news and in a lot of last couple of years, and there's many incidents. So there isn't, we shouldn't, a scholarly person isn't a saint, and a sinner isn't a devil.
Mm. Yeah. No, good point. Good point. I wanted to gear the conversation back a little bit to something in the beginning that I had mentioned, which was life imitates art and art imitates life. And I had mentioned to you at Islam in Spanish that I always thought it was so funny how if you watch old Bollywood films, there's a scene where there can be a scene or there have been scenes where a lady will fall off the top of the stairs and she'll roll down and she'll die. She tripped over her clothes. And I just always find it so fascinating that that is the story of how Humayun died, the
Yeah,
Mughal emperor.
yeah.
He tripped over his clothes and he fell down the stairs. Is there something about Mughal India that you think goes under the radar of most people? They don't know about it, but to you, you're like, wow, that's so fascinating. That's so interesting. I think more people need to know about this.
I think, I mean, people who are interested know a lot about. I think if you're from Pakistan or India, you definitely know about it in both positive and negative terms. Pakistan sees itself as a continuation or a preserver of Mughal India. India, why do they know about Mughal history so much? Because they're trying to erode it piece by piece, by changing names, street names to even city names here and there, town names. So the history is there, right?
Well, what
But
does
what
it
I
mean?
find,
Pakistan is a preserver of Mughal
well,
India. What
because
does that
they're
mean?
because India is eroding it, and Pakistan is preserving it. They have preserved Lahori culture, right? The Badshah Masjid is there. There's a tourist industry in Lahore because Lahore was the cultural preservation of Mughal India. And
The Lahore in Pakistan,
Lahore,
that
yeah,
was the hub. Well,
no, our cultural hub.
okay.
While Delhi was the political hub. And
Mm.
that's why when you go to Lahore,
DC and Los Angeles.
yeah, you could, yeah, I would say, yeah, DC, I would say New York. Like Lahore was the New York of at that time. And actually was, and when I say at that time, I'm talking about the New York of the world, right? It was not just like, Urdu culture or anything like that. It was mix of many different cultures out there because, Akbar allowed many people to flourish there and money and economics money was bleeding into the Mughal Empire because the way they traded around the world, no one matched, right? I mean, they were constantly producing new things and they weren't in a way. I mean, they were extravagant, but let's just say everybody ate, right? So if you go to Lahore, actually, you know, people who are Lahoris would definitely know this. If you visit Badshah Masjid, right, which is one of their, I guess, all giant hubs that the Mughal Empire built, there's a gate that says Delhi Gate, because that's the gate they would go through to now march towards Delhi. The reason for that was because it's super wide, it's designed for elephants to cross through. In fact, one of the funny things about the Badshah Masjid is the stairs are huge, like they're wide, like as if like I don't know, 15 people could fit through from the width point of view. And the question is why? It's for elephants. The elephants will go in the masjid, they'll go all the way up there, drop off the women or whatever. So when the Mughal Empire, when the nobles and the emperor would travel, let's say further west, they would come back to Delhi, but they would rest first in Lahore and kind of prepare themselves for a journey. So Lahore kind of in a way, when I say rest, I mean you have to think that they're staying there for a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months, right? A culture developed around that, right? And then they would kind of go there to back to Delhi because Delhi was for political purposes was their headquarters. Lahore developed individually. It became very culturally fascinating. And then obviously the cities around Delhi till this day, Lucknow, you know, like everybody, I mean, the cuisines are still preserved. And I think like,
Nihari.
yeah, Nihari itself is actually, you know, I'm not a big fan of Nihari, not anymore. I maybe because I just had too many heartburns. But Nihari was like, you know, designed as a high calorie intake because you're supposed to eat it for breakfast and that energy is supposed to last you the rest of the day. It's food for labor actually for laborers. It's not meant for people just to eat and go back to sleep, right?
Arguably the best kind of food, eh? Food for labor.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's supposed to last that long. You're supposed to eat it for breakfast because you might not eat anything till dinner, and you're going to be laboring for whatever reason. You could be in the army or whatever. So it was designed for the masses. But it's so funny. It's like, you know, if you ever visit, like one of the fascinating things about for me, just Mughal history is um, even the term Mughal is preserved in the English lexicon. What do you call a powerful industrial man? Mughal. The Mughal of this, the Mughal of that, right? So
I
it's
like how you pointed that out.
yeah,
It's similar with tycoon. It's a
yeah,
Japanese word that's preserved itself in the
exactly.
English lexicon.
Exactly. And Mughal, the word Mughal is preserved. And you know that they not only had like let's just say a classical preservation, but they had historical, lexicon, economical, military. Their influence was heard around the world. And this is, you know how like people, let's say people in Indonesia, where would they want to visit? What cities pop in their mind if they want to just like see the world, right? And they would name like maybe three or four cities, like New York, Los Angeles, London, maybe Tokyo, right? It's like you go there, you're like, yo, I've seen the world now, right? That was Lahore of its day. That's how powerful, like in the imagination. There's a reason India came to, you know, I mean, sorry, England came to India along with the Portuguese, along with other and France. They were all there for a reason. They knew
Yeah.
they knew wealth was there.
Speaking of the English again, that does shock me, the idea of the intermixing between the cultures and
Yeah.
the progeny. Why do you think it is that if it is so common, why don't more of us know so much about that? Like we know, of course, the English came to subcontinent, but why don't the masses know so much about? Well, there's a chance that you might have English relatives.
Purity of blood, and just pure racism. Like they don't want their blood to be mixed, right? One of the ways to identify someone who doesn't look like you is by the color of the skin, and this actually goes back to even when Andalus was captured, and the slow erosion of I guess, like religious identity of not just Muslims, but even Jews. One of the you had to the way they judged you was you were either outright Muslim or you were a convert, right? And so when you converted, they would watch you and they would watch your children. So what they realized is that, you know, if you had slightly different color, you're definitely inbred. Like you're not inbred, but it's the wrong term, but you definitely have Morisco blood. You definitely have, like, Moorish blood in you. That's what they're called, the Muslims, Moors, right? Yeah. So they were kind of that idea of racism, even, kind of dates back to even like North American slavery. It's just like Europe decided for some reason that one of the ways they wanted to separate the world from how they are is through color. And they would give, color codes, you could say, to different worlds. And if the codes kind of mix it together, nope. That's why, there was that one drop rule, right, within American law, is that, okay, let's pretend that you're a white man and you ended up marrying or having a slave or whatever, but your child is half black, half white. But let's say that person married your child married a white person, then even though you're kind of becoming more white over the years, the fact that you still have a certain amount of black blood in you still makes you black, according to U.S. law, right? And that was just from a legal point of view. From a cultural understanding of us, how Spanish understood it, it was definitely a way to differentiate between us versus them. And it's the same thing. It's like how can you integrate into a culture that we want to conquer? That's how they came to us. We came to conquer, we came to plunder their wealth. Why would you want to integrate, right? You want women? We'll bring women over for you. Don't worry about it. Don't assimilate, don't adopt their culture. But even though there was a fascinating, I would say, pre-1865 culture of mixed kids and mixed blood, all that was over. And you do that by legal enforcement. And this is not just in the 1800s, but you could even see this in South African apartheid law, where there was actual laws that you're not, as a white person, you're not allowed to marry a black person. Borrowed from, obviously, American laws too.
Wow.
But by
It's
the way, just to continue, when someone hears this legal, right? Like, hey, oh, no, that means that they will be punished legally if they do so. Just want to throw it out there. Keep that.
explain that again. What does that mean? Say it again.
So if see there's always a cultural understanding, right? Racism. If today someone marries, in the postmodern world, marries someone outside their race, you might be culturally shunned. Your family might shun you. There isn't a legal consequence, right? There's no jail time. In the Jim Crow laws, and then also the apartheid South African laws, which were, in the 1950s, slowly were getting worse and worse and worse. Um, there's legal consequences for that.
Are
Which
you aware if anything like that existed in the subcontinent?
um no, I'm not sure, because remember, the whites were minorities, right? If they did end up marrying someone outside their culture, um, English law probably didn't care as much. But what they did was they did try to make sure that your identity was preserved. And one of the ways to do that is to preserve your language and change theirs. So there would be laws like the Minute of Education, where if you wanted to, like, so, whenever people think about conquering, and or they always think like, okay, we're going to wipe out the indigenous people and just take over their land. It's not exactly like that. It's kind of like, okay, we conquered you, now we're your governing force, and we're gonna govern you in the way we see fit. So the English still provided, let's say, funds for education, right? They would
Mm.
educate people here and there, but only if you taught in English. right? That means the best jobs were people who spoke English. If you want to join the army, if you want to do this, if you want to be close to power, you have to learn English. So if you decide to go through the typical madrasa route and learn Arabic and Sanskrit or Farsi, you're out of a job. You're not going to really fit in society because everybody's trying to kind of restructure the society this way. Same thing happened
Yeah.
in South Africa, which Afrikaan, the language of which is majority Dutch, was enforced upon South Africans.
Yeah. I always reflect on how the Pakistanis and the Indians have really good English. Even if there's an accent, it's
Yeah,
still really good English.
it's
And
British. It's British. I thought the exact something. Why do Pakistanis have really good British English? And
yeah.
it's that's how you if you change every single medium of communication, whether it's your textbooks, your newspapers, your news anchors, and and your songs and your culture and your cuisines. In fact, which reminds me, there was actually when the British Raj started in 1865, the way to impress them, what they would do is there was a book that would come out and it would be a training manual for your maids, which would obviously be Indian. And it would be a training manual how to impress your boss with the type of cuisines that you should make, right?
Hmm.
So all that power definitely
Do
influenced.
you know if there's a cuisine like from that specific manual that is popular still today?
No, nothing that comes to the top of my head, but it's
That would
something
be so
that one,
interesting if like
yeah.
one day you discover, oh,
Well,
Lahori
actually,
fish is only popular because of the
I mean,
British.
it's not a cuisine, but you know about it. Tea,
Hmm.
right? It's not a cuisine, but I mean, before East India Tea Company, no one was drinking tea like crazy over in Pakistan, but now it's 3 times a day, and that's a cultural and a power move that was enforced upon it.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but for myself, I feel like I'm much more well versed in English than I am Urdu. I speak Urdu, I'm fluent in it, but
Yeah,
English is my language. It is the language I think in.
yeah, I didn't
And
use
I just, it's like, wow, we're on this side of the world. They ended up coming all the way to us centuries ago, and now we've
it.
come to them. How
It,
fascinating.
it's it was fascinating to me, like, oh yeah, we're a part and parcel when we met at Islam and Spanish, and I thought when I was actually, which your poetry was amazing, by the way. Still, I still think about it because it was something that stood out to me. But I was like, kind of just thinking back from as an audience member, and I thought like this is pretty fascinating. Where as immigrants and people from various cultures are there, and now we're past our immigrant identity, right? Where we're just trying to, because someone, there was a forgot who it was, but we're past the survival stage. As immigrants, you come in there, you're just trying to survive, right? You left everything behind. You didn't bring anything with you. You're just trying to survive. And then, the next generation tries to grow, right? And then the generation after that tries to preserve. And I guess we're in the growth and preservation stages, depending on which wave of immigrants you're part of. And the fact that we're getting together just to share art, right? I thought that was pretty fascinating because you have that time and you're not just hustling, right? You're thinking about the cultures around you, thinking about the world, and you're representing your mind and your heart and your soul through poetry and art. And I thought that was pretty interesting because everybody in that room, it's not like they were like indigenous people, right? It was a mix of cultures there. South Asians to like Africans there to Autumn there. And I thought that was very beautiful.
Latinos.
Yeah, exactly. It's very beautiful, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
there. I mean, nowhere around the world you're there, as Muslims, that you are dealing with a room full of just like maybe 3 or 4 different cultures, you know?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
like,
that's something I always
yeah.
reflect
And
on.
you're
I'm like,
sharing
man,
your art. You're sharing your art in your own medium, but you're sharing your art. And I thought that was pretty amazing. I thought, finally at the stage where now we're able to communicate not just about, the next best job, or now we're just communicating about our art and speaking about other things other than just survival because we're past that stage.
very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. Yeah, that the phenomenon of just having all these cultures, the fun, the fact that all these cultures are so accessible to us,
Yeah.
it never fails to amaze me.
I
That
mean, it's fascinating only because, we didn't come here because of design. Like, at least South Asians, right? We're not here because, we think, oh yeah, our parents came here looking for a better opportunity. The story doesn't go that way, actually. Our parents came here just to look for a better opportunity, but they were allowed to come here to look for a better opportunity. You have to keep that in mind, right? This We are a product of the Cold War because there was a lot of brain draining of India and Pakistan, where Russia was trying to drain as much smart people into their I guess ethos, and America was like, oh God, we need people too. So they uplifted the Chinese exclusion law, which prevented any basically if you're not white, you're not coming to America, right? They they uplifted that law, allowing us to come in. So a flood, not a flood, but maybe slowly, Indians and Pakistanis came, right? And then there was a wave of us coming. And I am that product. I'm a wave product. My parents came in the 90s. But my uncle, my dad's brother, came in the 70s because of what? Because they wanted some smart people, or at least potentially smart people, to come to America and help with their causes, especially in the oil and gas industry. That's why my uncle came to Houston and went to University of Houston. And through flyers that were actually passed out in Lahore University, Karachi University, Bombay, all those things. And we are otherwise, if they weren't fighting the Russians, who knows if we'd be here or not? Would they even need us?
yeah,
Would they even need our labor? And there was very few
yeah,
people who actually made it before that. Very few. And there's a fascinating documentary about one of this, I guess, I'm not sure if you've seen that the town that's like almost completely Pakistani. And this guy came in the 1940s or 20s or whatever, and fought through and lived in that era and sold burgers, but they were just Pakistani bun kebabs, you could say. Uh,
where is this?
I'll share with you this documentary. It's fascinating.
But
Yeah.
it's in the States?
It's in the States, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know about this.
It's and that town is mostly his family because his family just kind of expanded and
Huh.
through businesses. But he started as like a burger salesman and he was just selling bun kebabs because that's what he knew how to make.
That is
Yeah.
interesting, man. There was one more thing I wanted to share with
Yeah.
you, which was I'm really interested in the Vikings. I think sometimes people don't really understand why, but there's just so much to dissect with the Vikings. And you were just talking about Russia and how, there was this brain draining.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, if you the cultures of Russia and the Brits, there's a strong Viking influence at the source of it, of both of those.
Well,
And
you hit it on the nail. It's Ukraine at that time, or the Ukrainian, I guess, whatever Ukraine was at that time, wanted mercenaries to come help them, right? Because they didn't really have a military setup. So Vikings did not call themselves Vikings. There's different tribes here and there. One of the tribes called the Rus were invited, hey, why don't you become part of our, I guess, their military agency? And then the Rus decided, why are we protecting them when we could just expand and take over? We're the ones with the weapons. And that slowly expanded into Rus became Russia.
Yeah, and then there's another set of Vikings that have their own, set
Yeah.
of adventures on the
Norsemen.
English Isles. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I mean, the language we speak, as we were speaking about earlier, this language, so much of it comes from the Vikings as well.
Yeah.
So there would be no England if it wasn't for the Vikings, and there would be no America if it wasn't for England. So
The only sort non, maybe maybe not the only, but one of the things that comes to my mind, the non-Viking word is London, which is actually Celtic.
mhm.
Everything else is culturally influenced by the Vikings, or sorry, Norsemen.
Yeah, yeah. So fascinating stuff. How at the end of the day, all the dots connect. Back and forth throughout
Yeah,
time, and
yeah.
that is history. It's yeah,
I like it. I like that. Like I think history is connecting dots, from one era to another. And I think like when we find out like, our origin story, and not just that. And that's why for me, my journey, it's kind of funny how we're going back to the white Mughals. My journey with my fascination with South Asian history started with I think White Mughals was the second book or the first book in that genre. My journey with the love affair with South Asian history started with, once again, with William Dalrymple's book, but it was called The Last Mughal, which was about
Father
Shah
Shah.
Zafar II, and or Zafar Shah. And I just randomly was I used to love going to Barnes and Noble back then when it was actually fun to go there and just going through the history section and just grabbing a book to read. Mostly it was like, international history books. And that like I'll think, what is this? Like grab that book, and I'm like, okay. And I just couldn't stop reading it. And from there, my fascination with Delhi started. And from Delhi to Lucknow, from Lucknow to Lahore, and language and education curriculums around it. It started with that book. And it's kind of funny how you started with the White Mughals. Once again, connected.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the moguls have fascinated me, but I have to admit, I haven't really explored much of them since I was a teen. But
Yeah,
it's interesting.
it's still there's still research and growth into it. Just I'll share with you the book because it's maybe one of the authors who's actually I guess Indian um, from UC Berkeley, but I believe his book is renegotiating the understanding of how Mughals operated.
Mm,
Right. From because immediately when you read thing is like, you could always look at the ancient world as expanding through being conquered. But I think the term he used was military entrepreneurship.
mm,
And that's how the world operated back then. Hey, there's wealth there. I want to govern that wealth. It doesn't mean I want to go and slaughter everybody. I want to be the person in charge. And they would facilitate that through military means, sometimes even negotiations. Um, and if the Mughal Empire was how, it's a modern day, I guess like national, Hindu nationalists would say, if the Mughal Empire really wanted, and at the peak of their power, they were so powerful, why are there still surviving cultures and religions there? Like that's the fascinating part. It's like they preserved Indian identity, just by being there. As a foreign entity, India's history was preserved.
that is so unique.
Yeah.
I think that's very unique.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason actually that I haven't immersed myself so much in them is the subcontinent has so much history and a lot of it is documented, but we consume the culture that we're fed.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking to my Mexican friend about this, where I was telling him the story of Gonzalo Guerrero, and he's like, dude, that sort of stuff should be in movies. That should be in video games, but we don't see that often. And I was like, yeah, we really don't. There's so many indigenous cultures, right, or non-white cultures that I feel like don't get enough spotlight in different movies, video games, books, or maybe they do and we're not exposed to them on a mainstream level. Or maybe there are, but they're stereotyped like in Bollywood or something. So I think that
And that's
the
where
culture definitely plays a yeah, that's where art
art
plays a
plays a role. I
factor.
think art sometimes art could be used to voice people's stories that pop culture doesn't. Pop culture is gonna speak to only popular sentiments, right? Movies are gonna talk about superheroes, whatever it's selling is gonna be part of pop culture. But I guess art's always been this niche. And even within the film genre, right? There's cinematographic, Bollywood, Hollywood, big budget movies, but the ones who are indie and small are called art movies, right? It's because the audience is so small. Um, I think same thing when it comes to certain art, like even stories. Like there's certain stories that only some people are going to hear, but it doesn't mean their narrative isn't worth telling.
I love how you said that. This has been a fun conversation,
Yeah.
Haseeb. It feels like we traversed the globe a little, eh?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
have any closing thoughts? Anything you felt like you wanted to say, you didn't get a chance to, or something on your mind that you wanted to express?
No, I just want to say thanks. Thanks for allowing me to express my thoughts and I guess this global perspective that I have, and I really appreciate it. And appreciate the engagement as well too. It was fun. I felt like we just continued our conversation from Slav and Spanish.
Feels like it.
You just picked up where we left off.
Yeah, that's the way to put it, man. Well, I suppose until next time, eh?
Yeah, take
Inshallah.
care, man. Inshallah.